Welcome to the Ricky and Yvette Ballin in one sport while trying to figure out the other podcast. I'm your host, Dwayne Carter. Let's get started. What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today, I am lucky to be joined by Dr. Martin Smith. Dr. Martin Smith, we're glad to have you on the pod today.
Appreciate it. I'm glad to be here. Excited.
Yeah, man. So, Dr. Smith, I kind of let you go in and introduce, you give us your full title, what your position here is at Duke University.
Yeah, of course. So, Martin Smith, I started off here as an assistant professor of the practice in the program in education, and now I'm also the Dean of Academic Affairs of Trinity College and the Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education.
That's what's up. That's excellence right there.
Yeah, appreciate it.
So as we get into, I'm sure you guys are kind of anxious to know why I brought Dr. Smith on the show today. Dr. Smith has been honestly one of my mentors since I've been at Duke the last 3-4 years. And I was kind of introduced to him by some of my older teammates when I first came in, and connect's been strong ever since. He's very helpful with us for United Black Athletes, which is UBA, the group here on campus, and that's my guy. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background, like where you came from, what college you went to, let's just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So born and raised in California, Southern California, San Diego, California, in a small city, really outside of San Diego, 25 minutes out of the city center, and just grew up playing a ton of sports. Both my parents and 4 siblings, so 5 kids, 2 parents, and just a real journey always through sports and education. Sports were a constant in my life. I would say I played in my first sports league at the age of 5. I was playing T-ball, so baseball. Yeah. And my older siblings, I have an older sister, and then right below her is a twin brother, so a boy and a girl, and then me, and then my little brother. And so by the time I came along, I was always tagging along to their sporting events. And as soon as it was halftime, I was running on the field to play, or if it was halftime at a basketball game, I'm going on the court to shoot. And when they had practice, if they didn't have an extra player or they needed somebody else, I was trying to step in and play. So really, before I started playing, I was trying to play, and just grew up playing everything from baseball to soccer, tried my hand at tennis maybe for a year. I played football in high school. I played basketball in high school. And then when I went to college, I walked onto the basketball team at UC Berkeley. I had a few D1 offers. I was speaking with Colgate. I was speaking to Navy about playing basketball there. And then I had a lot of offers from D2s, D3s, and NAIA schools. But I had really good grades coming out of high school, so I knew I wanted to go to a top-tier academic school, but I also wanted to play on the highest level because I truly envisioned myself being able to play against anybody. And playing on the AAU circuit, I played against the best guys from the Bay Area, the best guys from LA, the best guys from San Diego, and I always held my own, and in many instances, I got the best of guys. So although I didn't have a scholarship offer, I saw guys getting offers and signing to play at colleges. And I said, hey, I can outplay those guys. So I got into UC Berkeley on my own. And then I went and I tried out for the team and I made the team eventually. Then my next goal was to make the travel squad, which I made the travel squad my first year and then played in games as a true freshman and then kept playing, played more and more. I think my junior year, I led the team in minutes, led the team in assists, and then they gave me a scholarship as well. So it was a fun and surreal journey. If I could make an estimation, we traveled over to 30 states, and then we also played a tour in Italy against Italian pro teams and their national teams, which was really fun. So I guess that's a little bit of my background. When I was at UC Berkeley, I completed my bachelor's and my master's degree. And then I taught for 4 years and then went to UT Austin to get my PhD in education. But ask any questions you want about that journey or if something stands out. I come from an athletic family. Out of the 7 people in my family, 6 of us were point guards. So my 2 sisters were point guards, my 2 brothers were point guards, and my dad was a point guard. And we're no slouches, man. So My little brother played Division I basketball as well. My pops played Division I basketball, and he also played in the NBA and was an all-star and won a ring as a point guard in the NBA.
That's
So
very cool.
yeah, so.
Nah, that's awesome. I mean, it's crazy that extensive sports background, and you talk about how big your family is. Like, you got a big family. It sounds like it's just that competitive nature is probably always there. So, I mean, I'm just curious, like, how much did that, like, you guys all being hoopers, all being athletes, like, how much does that, like, competitive edge, like, exist in the house? Like, what was that like?
Man, it was tough. We competed over everything, but my dad kind of raised us in a way. It was like, I'm not giving you anything. You got to compete. You got to work. So
Yeah.
that was always the expectation when we were playing sports. I mean, I can give you an example of being a kid. You know, you have suicides at the end of practice. And I think I came home and I might have been saying, yeah, I played good in practice today. And he asked, how did practice go? And I said, we had some suicides. And I couldn't have been older than third or fourth grade. And he said, well, how did you do on the suicides? And I'm like, I probably won one or two of them. And he's like, you won one or two? And he's like, what happened in the other ones? I'm like, well, so-and-so won. And he's like, were you tired? Not really. And he's like, man, don't lose a suicide again. He's like, it ain't no reason they should beat you. Kind of like, and you know, you're a little kid, and I wasn't necessarily thinking like this. And when he said that, he was like, nah, every day you go out in that practice, especially if you're not tired, but even if you're tired, he said, win every suicide, make it a point. And man, to tell you the truth, and I'm not the fastest guy. I had pretty good speed, but I'm not the fastest guy. Man, you'd be hard pressed to beat me in a suicide after that day. And it was like stuff like that he would talk about in the house, or we'd go to the park and we would all race each other, and I'd be racing my older siblings. And in my mind, I could beat them, but I really couldn't. And at some point I did, but everything was a competition. And I'll give you one more example. Growing up, we have family reunions. We still have them. But we had these family reunions in Central California, and they would always fall on Memorial Day. And we would have, people would typically arrive like Thursday or Friday night, and then we would have this big picnic or barbecue on the lake. And, you know, people might roll out a volleyball net. As kids, we play water balloons and stuff on the lake and just eat and hang out. But then after that, we would go to a gym. And when I tell you, this was the most competitive basketball I ever saw. Yeah. Just growing up. And, you know, I might be biased because I'm thinking of my family, right? And you're like, my family's the best, or we're competitive. But I played a lot of pickup, but hear me out. My dad is one of 9 kids.
Oh, wow.
His dad, my grandfather was one, I believe, of 6. So I'm counting my uncles right now. My Uncle A.B., my Uncle Joe, Uncle Oliver, Uncle Samuel, and they had one sister. I'm blanking on her name, Aunt Magnolia. And so that's 6 of them, including my grandfather. Well, my grandfather had 9. One of his brothers had 11. Another had 8. So if you can imagine, there's all of these kids, and my Uncle Samuel, one of his sons played at the University of Arizona basketball. One of his daughters played at the University of California, Berkeley, UC Berkeley, where I also play. So this is the population above me. They were playing D1 sports. One of my dad's other first cousins played D1 basketball at the University of San Diego. Wow. His 2 little brothers could really play, but they kind of got derailed by different factors in life. And they're at the reunions playing. We had a cousin who played for the Raiders. And then if I think of my generation, I've got 2 girl cousins who played D1. One played at St. Mary's, one played at Oregon State. And actually another one played at the University of UNLV. So, and her brothers played D1 football. One played linebacker at USC on the national championship team, started. One played at UC Berkeley. One played at Kansas State. One played at, the youngest one ended up playing at USC. And then one of the other brothers, the younger brothers, played at, I want to say it might have been Arkansas Pine Bluff, but at HBCU. Yeah. And they all played linebacker. So, and I'm probably missing a few cousins, but these are all cousins who played D1. And there are cousins who played D2. I just named the ones who played D1.
Yeah.
So we're at these family reunions, and you can imagine you've got a lot of great basketball players, but then you got a lot of really talented football players who are super strong and athletic coming on the court like, man, you ain't gonna run the court. So you could just imagine you showing up and you're seeing that as a little kid, what that does to you in terms of your competitive nature.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's dope. First of all, how big y'all's family is and how successful y'all are. I mean, to get on to college, playing sports at really the highest level at that age is crazy. And
Yeah.
I kind of relate in the same way where my dad growing up, he didn't care what it was. Soccer was my first sport growing up because he
Really?
wouldn't let me play football until I really developed my body. He didn't want me to get hurt and everything. He didn't know a thing about soccer, but he was always the loudest parent. He cheered the most. He screamed the most. But he
Okay.
said two words: hustle and compete.
Right.
Right. So that kind of like shaped me because you start playing soccer when you're 5, 6 years old, playing
Right.
on the little goals and with the little kids, just running around for hours. And eventually I started getting pretty good. I played in the travel league, and typically I'm one of the only black kids on the team. And it's funny, growing up, I'm probably one of two, maybe of us.
Okay.
And my dad always stands out, not only for that reason, but he'd be the loudest, like I said, hustle, compete. Those are the only things he said. And
Right.
I used to hate it. I used to hate it because it was like, you're embarrassed. Like,
Yeah.
he don't know what he's talking about. Like, all these other factors. And as I got older, I realized, like, he really shaped me to who I am.
Right.
Because now in the football field, like, a lot of people know me for my effort, my consistency,
Right.
and
Yes.
my competing, like, just how competitive I am. So I'm forever grateful for that. And that's just so dope. Like, as y'all come together for, like, that's just so cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, thinking about that, like, I guess after your college career, like, did you look at the next level, or like, how'd that go for you?
Yeah, man, that's a really great question. So I finished in '06, and I was truly at an impasse in my life because I didn't see myself playing in the NBA. I had a decent college career, but wasn't good enough to play in the NBA. But I was good enough to play overseas. And the majority of my teammates were going overseas. Some of those cousins that I mentioned to you, 3 cousins went and played professionally overseas. 2 of my teammates went and played in the NBA, college teammates. And so, I had this desire to keep playing, and I always had this belief or vision that I was going to be a professional athlete. Now, when I graduated with my bachelor's degree, from the encouragement of some faculty members and a good friend of mine on campus, I decided to apply to 2 master's programs in education, one at UC Berkeley, one at the University of Washington. Only applied to two programs. I got into both. University of California at Berkeley, UC Berkeley, where I did my undergrad, I get in and they say, look, you've been accepted. We're going to pay for everything. You will work as a graduate assistant. You'll work with football players. So as like a tutor, learning consultant, and I think it was like 20 hours a week or something that you'll work, and your tuition will be completely paid, and you're going to receive a stipend. I think it might have been $1,800 a month. And so to me, that sounded great. Okay, school's going to be free, a master's degree, $1,800 a month. But then what does that mean about my basketball career?
Yeah.
I can't pursue that. So, I really was at a tough point in my life, and I'm looking at this road and I'm saying, okay, everybody is going to the left and everybody is going to play basketball. And really none of my peers were going into higher education that I was seeing at that time. And so I have a few beliefs or principles that I try to live by. And one of them is following the herd is a sure way to mediocrity. And I also try to take the road less traveled. And so at that moment, I've always said those things to myself, but I've always wanted to play basketball. And so, like I said, I was at an impasse, and everybody except my immediate family was telling me, play basketball. Look, you're young. You're never going to get this opportunity again. And I envisioned basketball was going to pay me a lot and I was going to get to see the world. But I decided to pursue the master's at UC Berkeley. And I believe that was one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life, because it set me on this trajectory to get advanced degrees, to learn more about education, higher education, and prepare me to be where I'm at now. I didn't see it that way, but prayerfully and, just following these beliefs or credences that I had led me on this path. And it's crazy because I told you I wanted to make money. Now, I'm not saying I make an NBA or a professional player salary, but I make money. I make good money. And I also have had the opportunity to travel the world through education. Education has brought me to Guatemala to conduct research on a research fellowship. I led a group of students to South Africa, and I worked at the University of Cape Town. I led a group of Duke students to Mumbai, India, and we spent, I think it was about a week to 10 days there in Mumbai. I've led a group of students across the South on a civil rights tour, Duke students. I took a group of students, Duke students, to Boston for a summer for Duke Engage. I presented at a conference last summer in England. So, it's crazy how life works, because many of the things that I wanted through basketball have come to fruition through education. And so it's been somewhat of a strange journey, but a great journey.
Wow. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, it's really a testament to betting on yourself. And I feel like just listening to you, I feel like that's what you've done basically your whole life, right? You talk about, I have a couple offers here, but I know I can play at this level and be successful at this level and still earn everything I want, right?
Right.
And that's I just feel like that's another one of our commonalities, because when I made my decision to come to Duke, I heard a lot of similar things like, well, you have an offer here. This team just played in the playoff. You should go play there. And then you're sure for the league. You're sure for this.
Right.
You can do this. You're going to go here. Everybody telling me kind of where I'm going to go. And then it's kind of like a couple parents here and they're like, oh, wow, Duke's a great school. I'm proud of you. But then, the peers and the people at the time who you really listen to when you're that age, or your friends, they're like, but you're crazy. You're crazy. You have a chance to go play in the national championship next year with this team. I'm like, no, that's where I want to go. Duke's where I belong, because I bet on myself, right, to get where I want to go, which is the next level, of course. And then after I'm done playing ball, to use my brain, and which is the main reason for coming here.
And you've thrived here at Duke athletically and academically, and everywhere I go on campus, people talk about you as Dwayne Carter, the leader. Dwayne Carter, man, that guy's got talent. That guy's going places. And in many ways, we know you're talented athletically, but people aren't even talking about your athletics. And then also, you guys are in a bowl game. So you've set out and achieved the many things that people said you would have gotten at another school. And I'm sure it's even sweeter coming here and seeing the journey of the arc at Duke.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I appreciate those compliments, too.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it took a couple of years, right, to get in the postseason.
Right.
But, not everything comes easy. And like you said, take the road less travel, which is kind of what I pride myself on doing, especially growing up. I was kind of raised. My mom always said, don't be afraid to be different, right?
Right.
Because God created you to be great. All that. I heard that all the time growing up.
Absolutely.
So I feel like that kind of reassured me in my confidence in kind of taking this path and going this way. And by no means is Duke a bad choice ever, which is why I'd always look at people like, you're crazy. I'm going to this institution, top in really the world for free. It's just a blessing, and I can play the same sport I love. So that's just awesome. I feel like that's why we gel so well. I mean, that mindset is just there. That's dope.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's dope. So, I mean, as you talk about, what year did you start here in Duke again? I forget. I'm sorry.
2016.
It was 16. That's why I do remember that. Because I remember I was coming up when I first got here. Everybody's like, you got to meet Dr. Smith. You got to meet Dr. Smith. He's so cool. He teaches the coolest classes ever, like Education 101, race and identity, through sport. So, I mean, can you touch a little bit on your class? Obviously not Education 101 anymore, but the class I just took last spring.
Right. Yes. So as you mentioned, Education 101, race, power, and identity from Ollie to Kaepernick. Students really enjoy those classes. My goal with my courses are to make my courses extremely relevant and engaging, and making sure that I've set out clearly defined learning objectives for students. So when they take my class, what are the things that they're going to remember? And I always hope that there are certain concepts and information that they'll look back 5, 10, maybe even 20, 30 years from now that they'll remember from my class. So I'm very intentional of how I create my class, not only the content that is delivered, but the learning experiences and the activities that we do. And so what gave me the impetus to start Race, Power, and Identity is I came here in 2016. And so I taught Education 101 the first semester. The second semester, I also taught Education 101, but Colin Kaepernick had just started his protest. And people were coming out of the woodwork, whether it be on social media or in person, and asking me, why is he taking this stance? And it was people of all races. And even sometimes it was Black folks like, what do you think about this? I don't necessarily agree. Mostly it was other races, but it was a little bit of everyone. Yeah. And for me, I knew I wanted to create a class on race and sport. I didn't think I was going to create it as early as I did in my Duke journey in my first year, but I like to strike when the iron is hot. And if I have an idea, I'm going to run with it. So he's taking this stance. People are confused. And immediately for me, being an athlete and being raised by a father who was an athlete and who came to be in an age where, you know, Black athletes are thriving and really dominating in the NBA, his era. But there was also this undercurrent of discrimination and racism. And so I was schooled by this individual who was born in the 50s, who is in high school in the late 60s, in the Bay Area, the birthplace of the Black Panthers. So this is my dad. And then his father, who I spent a ton of time with, his father and his mother growing up are from the South. And so I would hear all of these stories about them leaving the South and the brutal oppression they faced, and how in many ways they were successful in the South and had made a way, but there was so much racism, it didn't make sense to stay. So I'm aware of all of this history. And my grandfather, who came from Louisiana, my grandmother from Oklahoma, my grandfather served in the military. So when I'm hearing all these people saying, you know, Colin Kaepernick is disrespecting the military, and this group of people gave him the opportunity to protest, and he's biting the hand that feeds him, and the military means this, and the police means this, and he's taking for granted what this country offers. I'm saying, well, actually, you all don't know your history, because my grandfather served, but after he served during World War II, what did he return to? You know, and so for me, it wasn't so clear cut that you could just say, this is disrespect to the military and this isn't, or the military provides you these freedoms, because in many ways, those soldiers who returned after World War I and World War II, when they put on their uniform and came back and were proud Americans, proud Black men, do you know they were attacked? Yes. And so that uniform and the military and service and that flag means different things for different people. And I thought in that moment, people were, I would say, somewhat naive or willfully ignorant to not acknowledge that. And then the last piece that also informed not only my sports background, but just military service. My mom's brother served during the Vietnam War. And he lived in Oakland, California, and he got arrested and he never made it out. He was choked out by the police. And so he lost his life. And so that happened when I was in high school. And we went to his funeral, I believe it was my junior year of high school. We drove up from San Diego to the Bay Area, went to his funeral, and there really was no recourse. There was nothing we could do. We really couldn't investigate. They said they did their own investigation and there was no wrongdoing. So the police investigated themselves. And he's a Vietnam veteran, a military veteran, and he's killed by the police, this group entity that is supposed to protect you. And so for Black folks in this country, there's this complicated history. And for me, I said, okay, I've got to teach a course to explain this history. And many people were saying, well, why is Kaepernick doing this? And I studied this. And I'm saying, well, Kaepernick's not the first. If we go back in history, we can look at Craig Hodges, we can look at Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf, and these are basketball players who did similar things in the 90s. And then if you go a little further back, you can look at Wayamaya Tyus, who in 68 in the same Olympics protested just like Tommy Smith and John Carlos in 68. And if you look at 69, you have Curt Flood, who protests in baseball. You have Muhammad Ali in 67 who protests. And then if you go further back, My favorite athlete of all time, you have Paul Robeson, who's protesting lynching, and he is arguably the most accomplished scholar athlete this country has ever seen. And so people don't know this history, and these folks have literally, some figuratively and some literally, have been erased from history books. And so people are thinking Kaepernick is just doing this and he's the first one. This is a long-standing tradition in the African-American community. And in many ways, I would not be here before you on a podcast speaking as the Dean of Academic Affairs, the Associate Vice Provost, and a professor at Duke University if Black folks, athletes and non-athletes, did not protest in ways that ruffled the feathers of America. If they didn't block traffic on the freeway, if they didn't boycott buses, if they didn't fill up the jails, if they didn't, whether it's in North Carolina, the Negroes with Guns movement by Robert Williams, or the Black Panthers in Oakland, California, that spread all over the country, if they didn't do what they did and they protested in the nice, acceptable way, I don't sit before you as the Dean of Academic Affairs. And so people weren't making those connections. And so in my class, we really analyze and dig into this history and look at protest in a very in-depth manner to determine exactly why did change occur. Not what we were told necessarily in K through 12, because we were told Columbus discovered America, if we want to call a spade a spade. So, and there were people already here. So
Yes.
let's bypass that. The civil rights movement, although I love Martin Luther King, it was more than him. And we're going to analyze who was who, why change occurred, and also why we were taught what we were taught, and also what we weren't taught. And in understanding that, I think we can actually make sense of these protests. But if we don't have that information, we're operating with a false narrative. So for me, it was really important to interrogate that history and look at what is going on in sport. So for example, I'll just give you one example of like the 68 Olympics, John Carlos and Tommy Smith. Students love that sports history and they get into it. They get very excited. But then we juxtapose what was happening in sport with what was happening in society. So if you think about 68, one of the Kennedys is assassinated. Martin Luther King is assassinated. And that helps you contextualize those protests. So we often look at that picture and say, oh, that was cool. That was pretty nice. No, those brothers faced death threats, and it wasn't empty threats. They killed Kennedy. They killed King. So those brothers really thought they were going to die and put their lives on the line. And so seeing it in the context of what it was gives you a greater appreciation. And then once you start looking at the narratives, everything that they said about Colin Kaepernick, they said about those brothers. They're ungrateful. They don't respect the country. How can an athlete who's in the Olympics or who's making money take a protest like this? And so once you see that it's actually a repetitive theme or occurrence, in many ways, it's not so much about the protest. It's people don't want change and they want to silence the narrative or the movement. And so for me, students are actually thirsting for this information because in elementary, middle school, and high school, you don't receive it. So once they do receive it, students of all races get excited and they say, look, this is the information that I've been searching for. And now that you've given it to me, I want more and more. And so that's why my course has been so popular, I truly believe.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I can attest, obviously taking the course less than a year ago. I mean, we learned so much specifically about the bus boycott. I mean, everything I went into, and it was really a whole community event. But also, I remember in 7th grade, I had a history teacher, I think world history, and he said something so simple, but it was so profound to me as what, like 11, 12-year-old at that time. And he asked the class, he said, why do we even learn about history? A simple question, like everybody kind of looked around like, I don't know, dude, like we got to graduate. Like it's just,
yeah.
And he's like, so history doesn't repeat itself. And it was just, that was so simple, but it was so profound to me because I never really thought about it like that.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, he's 100% correct. You got to learn from yourself. You know, I started translating everything to sports because that's what I do. I've been an athlete all my life. Like, all right, you watch film from the previous game, so you learn from your mistakes, X, Y, and Z. And it's funny as you look back through history, kind of as you just described, like it just kind of keeps repeating itself. So when you go into the history books and all that, well, the history books, quote unquote history books, and how we've been deprived of everything coming up. So it makes sense on why we just have this repeated cycle.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's just, and I remember going in your class that first day, I was like, this is my kind of class because this is what we need. And it's
Right.
funny because it's a beautiful thing. You go in that classroom, it's all races, all people from different backgrounds,
Yes.
all demographics, like just excited to learn about the same thing
Right.
and trying to make the world a better place at the end of the day, what it's about. So I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I'm glad. And if anybody listening, if you ever had the opportunity, usually Duke has open classes. I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed to sit in one at all.
Yeah. Check it out. Come check it out.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's awesome. But I mean, one more last question before I let you go, man. I
Okay.
appreciate you once again. And as someone who's kind of pursuing this educational field and trying to kind of make it the same spirit that you are, like,
Right.
why do you think it's important for someone like me to enter this field of work?
Man, because in this country, there's a rich history of African-American educators. So I love history, and not just the mere fact of studying history or reading books, but I think it's important to learn about the past because it impacts the present and our future. So if I think of Black folks coming out of slavery in this country, in many ways, we led a movement for public school education or to educate the masses. Because coming out of that era, there were so many folks who may not have had what we might say adequate housing or jobs, or even, food was a day-to-day existence thing, where hand-to-mouth existence, where you're fighting to find your way. But even amongst that, or amidst those conditions, Black folks were saying, we need our kids to be educated. We were taking money and developing schools, building schools, and in many cases before communities were built to build education or educational structures. And so for me, it's critical that somebody like yourself does that, because Black folks in this country have always valued education. And I would actually argue that we value education more than anybody else. We have literally died for education. And I think there's somewhat of a misnomer where society tells us Black folks don't value education. Black folks are like this, Black folks are like that, but it goes back to history. We're often fed these narratives that are different than what actually occurred. And so for me, it's important because you're a part of a rich history and a rich tradition, but it's also important because if we don't tell our own stories, who's going to tell them? Who's going to tell them in their totality? Because like I said earlier, Paul Robeson is my favorite athlete. Scholar athlete, intellectual athlete. And if you don't know who Paul Robeson is, Google him. But
yes,
he's a two-time All-American in football, but he also plays basketball, track and field, and baseball. High school valedictorian, college valedictorian, plays in the AFL, so plays professional football, goes to Columbia Law, gets his law degree, he's Ivy League educated, and then he becomes, because there's so much racism in the law profession, he becomes an actor, and he has this deep bass baritone voice, and he has recording contracts. So he's acting on TV, he's acting on Broadway, he's acting across Europe, he has recording contracts, he's singing all over the world, but he also, to some extent, opposes the US government because Black folks are being lynched all across the country and they have no recourse. And so he challenges and starts airing out the dirty laundry of American society on an international stage, and he's canceled. And I don't say canceled figuratively. He's attacked. Some argue that he was poisoned, and he is literally erased from record books. At some junctures, he's banned from television. And so nobody is going to tell these stories except us.
Yeah.
And Paul Robeson is just one individual. How many other individuals has this happened to? How many African-American leaders and activists and talented individuals who would be influencing society today were killed or maimed because they held beliefs that people didn't like. And so for me, who's going to tell those stories? Who's going to challenge society? I think it's no better than people who look like us, who carry that history and that tradition. And also, in many ways, people look up to athletes. And so if you can bring the best of your athletic background and the best of your academic background, and you've played at the highest level athletically, the highest level academically, who better than you to share information, and as a competitive person to really think about what education can do for people and use it to inspire others. The same way that you do on the field. I seen you on the field. When you make a tackle, you jumping up, you screaming, you slapping people, getting people excited. It's the same thing with education. Yeah. How do you inspire? How do you encourage? How do you galvanize your team? How do you get people to have the same enthusiasm that you have? And it's slightly different, but it's often the same. So I would say that a person like you is perfectly primed to be an educational leader.
That's awesome. I appreciate it. And it definitely gives me more confidence. I mean, especially with a couple of these interviews, I've also spoken to Dr. Wallace already.
Okay, nice.
And Mr. Will Cole, I don't know if you ever met Will Cole. He works in the K Center.
I don't think campus. I have.
Yeah, he works in athletics as well. But it's just, I mean, between you three, like, you guys just keep giving me more positive reinforcement, kind of give me more confidence going that field. So I appreciate y'all for uplifting and just providing with advice whenever I need it.
Man, it's all good.
But I mean, that's pretty much it I have for you. I know if you have any last words.
Man, just keep doing what you're doing. You're doing a great job. And I would just say keep learning, growing, asking questions, and taking the initiative in everything that you do. And I see you going extremely far in whatever you choose to pursue.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, that's it for this episode. Appreciate y'all tuning in once again. Dr. Smith, it was great to have you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for all the listeners. We'll see you on the next episode. Peace.
All right.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you all learned something. I hope you were engaged. And if you have any further questions about the content that we discussed today during the conversation, feel free to reach out to me through my various social medias. And if you have any questions for the guests, you can also reach out to me as well. But also, I will link any accounts they may have, even though some may have mentioned it throughout the interview. But yeah, once again, I appreciate y'all tuning in. Hopefully see you next episode.